Okay, the topic of this one, Chapter 17 in the big book, and it's, I don't know, 6 or something in the other one, is Windows resources on a network. And this is kind of a mishmash of what's there, but when you take the A+, they will ask you some of these kinds of things. Objectives: learn how to support some client-server applications. And I think that, between you and me and the fence post, a lot of the stuff that they talk about probably a little bit beyond the scope of this one, more into, they talk about policies and so on. That is not more of, that is an Active Directory function. How to share and secure files and folders on a network, and we'll go through that, and you'll go through that again in the Windows classes. It's not really all that difficult, but if you want it to be hidden, those kinds of things, we'll look at those. How to troubleshoot network connections. The best way, I mean, there are tools obviously. Ping, are you making connectivity? What layers are you making connectivity? What's it doing? What's it not doing? Kind of deal. And this goes back to the apply what you know. What is actually happening to the system? Things that you're expected to support: Internet Explorer, remote desktop, and then they say other remote applications. Remote applications, obviously something that runs someplace else. Terminal server is typically what's going to be necessary for the other stuff if you want to run Microsoft Office remotely, for instance. Although now we can do all that with applications through Internet Explorer with Office 365, right? You don't actually have to go out and buy it and install it and do the terminal server, which kind of a different thing to know. Configure the network. Wake on LAN is something that's kind of interesting when it gets some traffic, and it's specific, and it is called a magic packet. Magic packet, even if the computer is turned off, it'll wake up. And what that's really used for is when you want to update machines in the middle of the night. You don't want to do it during the working day. Quality of service techniques, and then group policy. Group policy is something that, true, we'll talk about it, but that is an Active Directory thing. Internet Explorer, they say, and it is, I do a website and you can do good stuff. It's still the one that's used the most, the browser that's used the most. Although as we go more and more and more to tablets, I see on the website on that more and more and more people using tablets, using those browsers instead of Internet Explorer. But it's still at the forefront. It has a reputation of being insecure. If you really go and dig into these things, the secure-insecure thing kind of rotates around between them and Firefox and Chrome. So it's just a matter of generally, as the others, keeping them up to date with the Windows updates. And this is not true. What are we on now, like 11 or 12? 12. I think 12 is one that just came out, depending on what you're running. So, and it says as of this writing, what you want to do is have the latest version, because it's generally going to have all of the security incorporated in it. And occasionally they make it work a little better. Usually for me they make it work a little worse, because Microsoft has a tendency, and this may just be me, to have things do what they did before, but they hide it. They move it someplace else, so that you know what you want to do, but you can't. I mean, you know where it used to be, but you don't know where it is now. Windows Update, and you should, in the Windows world, unless you have proprietary software on your network, I think probably just configured basically to upgrade. We had an issue, have an issue here. We have this tracking software that they use, and as we went through the latest round of Windows updates, for some reason it doesn't work anymore. So, and they say, oh, just use a different browser, and that's okay as long as you've got a different browser. But occasionally, before you do this, if you have a lot of machines, like a 1,000 system network, you may want to try it out before you actually apply it to everything. And in a network, you're going to use a thing called WSUS. And those of you who have had the Windows classes, I hope you remember what that means, Windows System Update Server, where the update server goes to Microsoft and downloads the updates onto your local area network, and then you as the network administrator decide what to apply and when to apply those updates. If that's the case and you have proprietary software, you may want to check the updates before you actually apply it. Tips when using IE to show the menu bar, press the Alt key, and I think that comes and that goes whether you turn it on or off, and you can turn it back on. F1 to open the Windows Help and Support, F11, F12 for full screen, those kinds of things. Tools icon, internet options, several boxes, general tab. I think what I want to do, security tab, because there are a couple of things that I don't think they cover that I want to look at. This is one that we'll look at. Proxy server. What does a proxy server do for you? What does it do? John shaking his head like, does really good stuff. What really good stuff does it do for you? What does a proxy do? What does a proxy in general do? You guys that have 401ks or IRAs or whatever else, or stocks.
Filters, contact, malware, social media.
What does a proxy do? I know you're reading stuff, but what does a proxy do? Huh? Acts as an intermediary. Actually, a proxy does something for you. If you own a stock, you get a vote on at the stockholders meeting. But unless you're going to the stockholders meeting, you elect or assign your proxy to somebody. That means that they can vote your shares. What a proxy server does is when you go from your machine to the proxy, which is going to be, and this we'll say is there are other proxies other than HTTP proxies. We'll say this is it. But you go to the proxy server then goes out onto the internet to get the information for you. So the machine back here never actually gets to the internet. The proxy server. Application level firewall, you may hear it called, because you can control things. And what were some of the things? Now I'm ready, John. What were some of the things it would do? You could filter stuff, right? He lost his place now.
No.
You can filter things. You could check for viruses here.
Right.
You can keep people from websites that you don't want them to go to. I've told you the story what I used to do with my son when he was in high school. I used a proxy server. And what I could do is filter where he could go, when he could go there, and then I could go see where he had been because it caches that stuff. Logs. So all you guys here, and proxy servers are configured in this building. So, you know, all that stuff that you think you're getting away with, it's logged. It's logged. When you start doing networking, learn how to read the log files. They all work a little differently. You're going to have some software to help you do that. I circled HTTP here. There are others. We have the SOX proxy, and this is the one that AOL used to use, was the SOX proxy. An FTP and a secure proxy. And down here you check this, say use the same server for all of them. You may or may not have the services enabled on them. And this is proxy server, we said, intercepts requests that a browser makes of a server and serves up a request from a cache it maintains. The advantage to a proxy server is, and we started using one a long time ago, when we had these really fast 56K connections and we had 400 users. Wow. That doesn't sound real good, does it?
No.
What happened was, typically in an educational environment, everybody's going to for labs in particular, everybody's got to go to the same place. Well, the first user that goes there at 56K goes fairly slow. But then it's cached. Where's my cache to circle? Then it caches the information. The next person that goes really fast, because all I got to do is go to the proxy server. You don't have to go to the website. Can make things faster, particularly if you have static content. We're looking at here, programs, default web browser, add-ons, HTML editing, what we're going to use for those things, the programs to manage add-ons. And I think what I want to do is, now that we're done with that, go stumble through a couple of these things. So there's one thing in particular I want you to pay attention to, and that's where your certificates are stored. Discard all that stuff. And each of the browsers has their own whatevers here, right? To manage those things. So if we're going to go to Internet Explorer, we'll go to Tools, Internet Options. Get rid of. I guess I'm not going to get rid of that thing, am I? Well, you can't have this open and close the web page. But we can get there a different way, can't we? What's another way to get there, maybe? Kind of, sort of. Control panel, Internet Options. And I can minimize it. Problem is I can't really stretch this. So when we look at these things, we'll go through security web, internet, local intranet, and then trusted sites. Protected mode, and one of the issues that you may have with some of the stuff that's used around here, protected mode's enabled, it may or may not work. Particularly the SCORMs. I think the SCORMs have a real issue with protected mode. So it is something that obviously we would like. It makes the system more secure. And we see down here, it says some settings may be managed by your network administrator, and now it goes back to group policy. So maybe we'll see a little bit of that, which comes a little later on. In the privacy, turn on the pop-up blocker, disable the toolbar extensions in the when private browsing starts. Standard privacy, we have sites, import, and advance in the privacy, and I think he's got some of the stuff done here. Content's the one that I wanted to look at. Certificates, we can see all of our certificates. These are all of my personal certificates for whatever. Boy, I got a bunch of them that I may or may not need. These certificates are stored in your profile. Your personal certificates are stored in your profile, which means that if you have used one of these things, like for an encrypting file system, and you've encrypted a bunch of files, and something happens to your profile, gets corrupted, gets deleted, or whatever else, because on a network, you may want to delete profiles. And when you do that, the certificate goes away. When the certificate goes away, you still have the encrypted files. Problem is, you can't decrypt them. In order to back these things up, really tough, we can import and export the certificate. So if I wanted to do one here, I can export it to whatever. And when you do that, yes, export the private key, because in the public key infrastructure world, it doesn't do you any good to have the public key without the private key. Encryption is done with the public key, and decryption on the server or on the machine is done with the private key. So when you do that, and this is just be next, and save it to, give it a file name and save it someplace. So you can save those things through the certificates area here. Autocomplete, what you want to do, whether you want to do it. Feeds and web slices. Web slices are kind of neat, kind of not neat. Content advisor, I'm not going to go in there. And when you get to the Windows class, you'll have a couple of those things. Connections, in this one, LAN settings, this is where you configure the proxy server. If I go into it and go into the advanced, and you notice that it can be configured. It's not actually configured in this one. for whatever reason. I thought it would be. But you got the HTTP, the secure FTP, and the SOCKS, and then if you want to use the same proxy server for all the protocols, you only have to put it in once so that they all go to the same location. If you have exceptions, you'll put them down here. Addresses that you don't want to use the proxy server for, because sometimes it may cause you issues. We had, and again, go back to us when we had, and I don't know if they still do or not, when they did the online website, they would have issues if it went through the proxy server. So you had to put an exception in there to do that. If you have things on your local network that you want to get to, you need to put those exceptions in there. The proxy server is designed to take your request and go to the internet, not to find things on your local network. So anything on the local network has to go in there. If you're going to use both a name and an IP address, guess what? You got to put them both in, because it's not smart enough to figure it out. Okay, so we did that. Automatically detect settings or do a script. The default, by the way, if you look at your one at home, is to automatically detect settings. If you want to save a little bit of time, you're not using a proxy server, just turn that off. Because if you're not using a proxy server, there's nothing to detect. So, I mean, you can do that. There's scripts, different ways to do that. The port here is port 80. The proxy port, and this would be the address of the proxy server. The proxy port for Linux machines is 3128. Generally, the port for Windows proxies is 8080. That may or may not be the case. You can set it to whatever you want it to be, but if you're using a Squid, a Linux Squid proxy, then it's going to be 3128 for that port there. And then we have the programs that they showed, and a HTML editor. What are you going to use for your HTML editor? You have your choices here. Manage add-ons if we have them, and this one's got several of those. Accelerators, tracking protection. You can turn, and you may want to do some reading on tracking protection, because it actually is a voluntary thing, and there are a number of add-ons for both Internet Explorer and for Google Chrome and for Firefox that say, don't track me. It is really interesting, and I read an article, and there was a piece of software that you could look at how many places you got tracked from going to a website, and it can get to the hundreds of tracks from a single connection. So, do not track me, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Do not track me, I think. Isn't that what it is now? It's called what? Blur. They've changed the name, but yeah, you may want to consider putting some of those, or one of those at least, on your browsers. And you can get it for internet. IE has some stuff. IE Gallery has some things that you can go protecting, ad tracking, and they have it's the same one. I think it's the same one. It's whatever the name is now. And if you don't want it to tell you that it's not your default browser and you don't want it to be your default browser, just simply uncheck that there. And if you still want it to be, you can go back and get it there. Advanced does a number of things. One of the things that I think you should do, and I probably won't be able to find it quickly here, but is to automatic recover, close unusual. I thought it was in here, but is to delete all the temp files when you close the browser. A number of not nice things show up as temp files. So it is in here, but I knew I wouldn't be able to find it real quick. It never works out that way, does it? Allow content, and these are things that you may or may not want to do. But go through this list and look at what you want, what you don't want, because sometimes the defaults are not really everything that you would think they would be. particularly that temp files. Automatic recover, close unused folders in history, disable script. It's not going to show it to me here real quick. As soon as I close it, it'll come right back on it. Anyhow, Internet Explorer, Chrome has its own configurations. Firefox has its own configurations. And if you're using Mozilla or if you're using Safari, they all get configured. Well, that was my friend here, Opera. And you really do just have to look and see what is available, what is not available to them. Remote desktop, I guess while we're here, we might as well just look at a remote desktop. What good is it?
Real good. If you have to fix
Okay, real good. I got it.
you have to fix somebody's computer from a distance.
It's from somebody's computer from a distance.
CenturyLink can do that, but you have to enter like a 4-digit code what they
Well, that's not really this remote desktop. That is a commercial software, absolutely. A couple of things are going to happen with remote desktop. One, you need to look at what version of Windows you have, because if you have Home Premium, you can't remote desktop to that machine. You can remote desktop from that machine. Remote desktop, the ability to remote desktop to a machine is something that happens when we get up to Windows Professional.
So would allow somebody to remote desktop in your computer to fix it if you need it, but you can't.
You can do that. Well, you can have, yes, those kinds of things. There are also other ones and kind of the stuff that John was talking about. And you heard this one before. TeamViewer is one that works really, really well.
Yeah.
And it's free for personal use. If you're using it in your enterprise to manage your Windows network, then you got to pay for it. And if you look at the pricing, it ain't cheap. But it'll fix all your firewall configuration issues. Okay, remote desktop, then we'll talk about the firewall configuration business here. Let's go to, I'm going to connect to, and this will be local 10.60, I hope, .66.253 if I can remember the password. And it looks like I did, but when I get there, the remote desktop is, in fact, a remote desktop. I'm actually on this machine. Keep in mind that if you go here and tell it to shut down, you just shut down the machine. You didn't shut down your remote desktop, you shut down the machine at the other end. These are the commands that actually connect to it. By default, you get 2 for free from Windows to manage the network, 2 administrative connections to manage the network. If you're going to use it for your users in a terminal server, which effectively are remote desktops, you got to pay extra for those. So we can do that thing. What I was going to say, you have to do some configurations. Let's get in here while we're on this server. And I just right-clicked on my computer. Now I'm going to go into Advanced System Settings, and you can go through. Actually, I didn't have to go through. I could go to Remote Settings or go through Advanced System Settings Remote and tell it to allow connections. The default is to not allow remote connections for Windows. You have to say yes. And by default, only administrators, members of the administrators group, can remotely connect unless you say okay. When I do that, select users, I can allow it. Select users, I can go in and add other users that are allowed to remote desktop to this machine. So we have that, select the users by default, and we have 2 options here. One is to any version of remote desktop, and the other one is network level authentication. Network level authentication is anything above Windows XP. And that gives you a little bit more security. And I think while I'm here, since it really wants to do the Windows update, I'm going to let it go. Let it restart now and see what happens.
All right, break time.
No, because this is remote desktop. Big deal. So I can minimize it. If I X it here, it disconnects. Disconnecting a session is different from logging out of a session. If you disconnect, everything that was running continues to run. If you log out, it shuts down all of the running processes for you. So if I was running whatever, I'm sorry?
Similar to virtual machines, we can actually leave the virtual machine.
The virtual machine, it's a little bit different. That's just you're managing it through a web interface. A remote desktop, if I were running, let's do something simple, like uploading a video, and it was going to take a little while. If I disconnected, when I went back, I'd still be uploading the video. If I logged out, it would stop that process, and I'd have to log back in and start everything all over again. But the difference between logging out and disconnecting. Let's see what we didn't cover here. Access to the Windows desktop from anywhere on the internet. Kinda. That sounds really cool, right?
Yeah.
What's the problem with that?
Anyone else can do it.
No. Well, yeah, true, maybe, but we usually have this thing called a firewall. What does a firewall do?
It prevents stuff from coming in.
It prevents outside users from making connections to your internal network. So, kind of true, right? Kind of not true. What you have to do is put an exception in the firewall that says at port 3389, if I connect to this address out here, port 3389, it can go through to that machine. That's on your home network. That's what port redirect's all about. You can redirect particular ports if you wanted to. Remote desktop to your machine at home. You go to your firewall, configure it to redirect port 3389 to whatever your internal IP address is. When you connect port 3389 to your public address, it automatically gets sent there. So we still have to punch a hole. We have to do the management here. But theoretically, we can get to it from anywhere on the internet.
Is that one of the things hackers try to use? Is that
what hackers do typically is a scan. And they're looking for open ports. 21 FTP is the most popular port to attack. But yes, that's one of the ones that they do attack. You can go to SANS.org and see which ports they're attacking or have the highest.
front that shows the live attack.
So, yeah, the live attack, that's kind of cool, huh?
Yeah.
That shows those attacks. Remotely access the server must be running, the remote desktop's got to be running. Computer accessing can be running any version of Windows as long as we tell it that it can be running any version of Windows. The default is no, to not allow remote access. You have to turn it on. When you get on your virtual machine, see if it's enabled by default. Probably make me a liar, but it should be off by default unless you've turned it on. Remote applications, things that are installed remotely, and this is going to be terminal server in order to do that, in order to run those applications. And these applications are going to be things like Word or Excel or anything else. Remote desktop services, terminal services prior to 2008, remote desktop services, and it's the same thing. They just changed the name of it. It's back to it still does the same stuff, still does it the same way, but we changed the name of it just to make me look stupid. But they do those things. That's what they do. RDP, both use RDP. RDP is a remote desktop protocol. And before we don't say it again, port 3389 is the remote desktop port. That's one of the ones that's in the list if you'll look at the objectives for A+ certification. Okay, this one you can read about. The system administrator provides a URL to the server, and I think this kind of is demonstrated. We can configure this stuff, but this is kind of demonstrated if you go to use Google Apps, or your Office 365 account where you run Microsoft Office. You go to a website and you run an application in these things. Wake on LAN causes the host computer to turn on when a specific type of network activity occurs. And typically you're going to have this magic packet, and you can search the internet, and yes, that's really true. It's called the magic packet. It wakes the computer up, even if the computer, if it's set to wake on LAN, and it may or may not be, then it gets turned on even if the server is off. My first experience with that was several years ago. We set a NetWare server up separately in the electronics lab, just for Todd at the time. And we shut it down. It came back on. And we shut it down. And it came back on. The NIC was set for Wake on LAN. And it was set not for a magic packet, but for any type of network activity. It came back on.
That's kind of pointless to turn it off.
Kind of pointless to turn it off unless you have a really quiet network. You have to you need to configure what's going to turn it on. So don't use Wake on LAN on a laptop, drain the battery, all those sorts of things. So what we want to set this up for is really to wake machines up in the middle of the night to do updates, so that you don't have to do the updates during the middle of the day. Quality of service. What quality of service does is assigns different services higher priorities. And typically, and I think they talk in the book about using policies to do that, and you're probably that's what you're going to do. You can enable it in the network adapter, and you can specify some things. Let me see go back to this thing and see if it will actually allow me to do it. As you know, with a policy, sometimes I can do things and sometimes I can't do things. So if we go to HIJKL network and sharing, change adapter settings, and let's see if I can find us here, local properties. Where did my properties go? Where did they? Oh, there they are. They showed up. We have QoS packet scheduler. I can install or uninstall. I can uncheck it. I can make it go away. If I go into configure, it says I've made changes. Do I really want to proceed? And I'll say yes. If I look in advanced, energy efficient Ethernet, on if a system is awake, flow control, receive and transmit. And if you look through these things, each of them is going to have, each NIC's going to be a little bit different. Here's that wake on the magic packet. And it says yes. Yes.
What if the computer that's supposed to wake automatically has a password on it? Do you have to put the password in it? Or?
No, because these things it's going to do things like updates that you don't have to be logged in for.
Oh, okay.
You're talking about what if it's logged in. All it does is start the machine. It doesn't log the machine in.
Right.
It starts it up. Wait for a link, UDP. So you can look through these things, and you should be able to do it look at it on your virtual machine. Try it out. See what happens. See if you can make it faster or slower. Receive buffers here when you go into this thing. The different values. We can make them bigger, side-by-side scaling. Reduce speed. So, flow control, receive and transmits enable. Interrupt. Jumbo packets disabled. Jumbo packets, it allows us to have bigger than a 1500 byte packet. So you can do management there. One of the other things here, look at power management. It says allow the computer to turn off this device to save power. Allow this device to wake the computer so we can do that. Why would we really want to, and it's always kind of amazed me, except maybe in a laptop you probably want to turn off the wireless because the radios, I think it's going to take a lot of battery power. Well, on my desktop, if my NIC goes to sleep, then it can cause some issues. In this room, we have Cisco routers, and we have a process called spanning tree for all you Cisco guys. Remember that? Takes about, what, 60 seconds, roughly, or 90 seconds. So if the NIC goes to sleep when you wake it up, the switch says, oh, I got to go check see if there's a loop. So it takes a while to get logged on. We actually had these when we turned it off, turned the spanning tree off on the access ports. Where you couldn't get logged in, you turn the machine on, and you would be ready to log in before the port on the switch was ready to log you in. Little kind of troubleshooting things that may or may not make differences for you. Yeah, I did. Local device. I didn't know that I tried to use that thing. Actually, I did get rid of everything. Yeah, we'll worry about that in a little while. That's why my desktop went away, because it's on that server. What did I enable?
Remember, you didn't recheck the power saving on the network part or something like that.
That shouldn't really make a difference. I'll look at it.
I think that's what you had on last.
That's the only thing I thought that's the only thing that I did. Anyhow, this is local, so it's not a big deal.
Or would that be in the event viewer?
There'll be a lot of places. Okay. Now it's resolving the problem that it's fixed. Group policies, quality of service we looked at. Group policies, they talk about gpedit.msc. I think what actually happened is when I did that, it turns the NIC off and then turns the NIC back on with the new properties. Group policies are something that we as the administrators manage through Active Directory. What that allows us to do, and if you look in the properties of your Internet Explorer, it's probably going to tell you that you have a proxy server and you can't turn it off. You can have different policies for different groups of users, as we do. What a policy actually does, making entries in the registry, what it does is controls registry keys without actually making permanent changes to the registry or tattooing the registry. NT 4.0 could have policies, but it actually tattooed the registry, which meant that if you did a policy, you had to apply the policy and then you had to restart the system for it to actually work. You don't have to do that here. It can be applied to a user or a computer, and to use the group policy to set the QoS, and you can have policies, local policies on your local computer. If you wanted to apply different things to different users of your home computer, you could do that through a policy. Shared resources, that's one of the advantages of networking, why we network, so we can share resources. That makes things better. It also gives rise to, we heard the word hackers here. That's what are they trying to do? They're trying to get a resource of some sort, aren't they?
Trying to gain some of your personal info.
Trying to gain, but they're trying to get some sort of resource. Could be gain from you, get into your bank account or wherever else. Get your Social Security number. If you have shared resources here, could do that. Rights and privileges are established when you create a user account. When we create user accounts, we've got like two types, a user, a regular user, and an administrative account. Administrators can manage anything, have power over the internet. The standard account can use the software, can't install the software, can't make hardware changes. Kind of like you are here, we are here in this network. The built-in user groups, and you can read these things. Power user group is an XP group that kind of was like one step below administrators. They could add stuff to the system, they could add programs, but what they couldn't do was see somebody else's personal files. An administrator on the network can see everything. There is no presumption of privacy on a corporate network. Now, is a network administrator going and looking for stuff? Not unless you give them reason. When I was doing it here, you get not got enough time, but you get this warning that says, hey, you got a virus someplace, and you go to that home directory, and you got all sorts of stuff in there. So don't lead somebody someplace you don't want them to be, I guess is the moral of that story. Authenticated users, these are used to be called, so these are system groups, anonymous users. The way you get to be an authenticated user, log in, you get authenticated. Then you're a member of the authenticated users group. Everyone group is even simpler, you just got to be. Anonymous means that you don't actually have to be authenticated. You use the username anonymous, and the password is, they say, put in your email address. It's any email address. One of my favorites is bill@microsoft.com. One of the ones I've been using lately is me@you.com or you@me.com. Doesn't matter as long as the format's the same. You got to have the @ I can't make an @ with this thing. When you do anonymous logins. The MMC to make groups, what customized groups is, we create groups, and here we create groups called students. And guess who's in it? Students. And we have a group called admin. Guess who's in it? All the admin people. And we have one called faculty. Golly, we put the faculty in it so that we can give different groups of users en masse access to different resources. Because they might give me access to this printer up the front here, that brand new one here that works pretty good. But they didn't give it to you, did they? No. They didn't give me access to the one in Mr. Geiss's office. Didn't give you either, but different users can use different resources by doing these customized groups. Home group sharing, work group sharing, domain controlling. These are strategies for folders. Home group, the first time I saw it, I said, yeah, right. Here's another one that doesn't work. This actually does work. Yeah. If you set it up. And it allows you to share resources in your own network.
What was the one before?
I don't remember. I don't remember. It didn't really work.
It would connect, and it would disconnect, and all kinds of stuff.
So work group sharing offers better security because in home group, anybody that's got the password can join the home group and get access to all the resources in it. Work group sharing, better security, yeah, I guess. But the disadvantage of work group sharing is each computer that you share a resource on, you have to have a username and a password in order to access that resource. Domain controller, or centralized, and really have to be a domain controller, it could be a standalone server, where we create user accounts, and in the domain controller we can control access to all the resources in the domain itself, centrally, through it. Data, these are things that you've already seen. Which folder to hold, shared data, private data. Create a folder. What I see a lot of times, people love to put stuff on their desktop. Me too. It's right there. Where does that go? Huh? Goes into your profile, which you have access to and other people don't. Then they try to share it out of the profile. It becomes a little bit more difficult. When you want to share stuff, public folder, they've got this public folder now, it works pretty well, but make a folder in the file structure. C:\share and share it. We'll go through the sharing process here. Probably already know how to do that, but to me is the best way to do that. Share permissions, NTFS permissions. I don't want to get into those too deeply. I'll look at them here quickly when we go through the sharing. I do want to try a share here. Let's see if we can do that. The other thing I want to do is see if I stop this thing. Okay, so to share files and folders, what we want to do, let me see if I can get one of my... The reason I need to use a virtual machine is because I don't have permission to share stuff on this machine. So, let's pick on this one. See if we can make this a little bit bigger, maybe. But that wouldn't be where I would do it, is it? Screen resolution. Yeah, a little bit better. We'll keep the changes here. When I want to share a resource, I right-click on it, go to Properties. I have two tabs here, Security and Sharing. I'm going to go into Advanced Sharing. There are two ways to do it, and we'll share it as Share. Permissions, the default permission is everyone gets read authority to this folder. When you share something, the only thing that does is allow users to see it across the network and puts a little bit of security on it. We're going to have two types of permissions, the share permissions and NTFS permissions. In machines before Windows Server 2003, the default permission was full control to everyone, which sounds really dangerous, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's not. So I'm going to share this as full control to everyone, and when we get here in a little bit, I'm going to tell you why I don't think it's dangerous. We go to Share, let's go back to this thing, Properties, and I got Security here, and Users have, we can edit it, have Modify, Read, and Execute, and you can read about what each of these things do, but it's authenticated users. And how did we get to be an authenticated user? By logging in. When we do permissions, now let me get back to this kind of sort of. When we do permissions, we have two sets of permissions that you saw there, right? We have Share and NTFS. Those were the two that were there in the security tabs, right? And NTFS. Slow down. The Share can be on FAT and NTFS folders. Can be on any one. And it is a remote permission. What that means is when I share something, it has no effect unless I access it across the network. If I sit down and log on at the computer, absolutely no impact. And in these things, you get what's called the most permissive, which means you get the highest level. And they say they add or whatever else. NTFS only works on the NTFS file system. NTFS. And it is local and remote. And we get the most permissive. Sounds really dangerous when I gave full permission there, right?
Yeah.
But when I put the two together, I get the most restrictive. So if I gave everyone read-only NTFS and full control, when I put them together and get the most restrictive, I get read-only. Okay?
All right.
There were lots of complaints about that default full control to everyone, so Microsoft changed it. And if you're used to the old way of doing it, you can really mess yourself up. I can really mess myself up. Because I'm going to share something and then give myself full control in NTFS, and I can't save it because the default is read-only share or read share, and then full control over here. When I put them together, I still get read. You just and you really do need to know how to manage these things, because this is a way to give away the store without knowing that you're doing it. When you configure permissions, try them out to see what works and what doesn't work. Advanced permissions, that's kind of all the stuff that we just talked about. Take ownership. You can look at these things. You can give a take ownership permission, but you can't give somebody ownership. That's because if John's out downloading really nasty stuff, and we're getting ready to do an audit, and he knows we're getting ready to do an audit, he may want to give away ownership of that. So instead of being able to give Todd ownership, he can give Todd permission to take ownership, and then if he can convince him to take it, shame on him. He's the one that's going to get caught for having the porn on his machine. But take ownership, you can give the permission to take it, but you can't give it away to anyone. Use only one work group. And a work group is just simply an administrative collection. It really doesn't do a whole lot for you, except everybody's a member of the work group. Welcome to the work group kind of deal. It does make it a little bit easier to connect the machines together. Require passwords. Use map drives, map network drives. Use centrally stored home directory stored on the server so you can back them up, because you probably don't want to back up 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 1,100 desktops every night. You wouldn't be able to do it. Map a network drive, that's in there. The net use command is what this one is about. Or, I said the net use command. You can map it. You can go to a share, right-click on it, create a map drive, have a drive letter. It's really handy, would be really handy if all these things like OneDrive and Box and those things would allow you to map drives. You probably can find a process on the internet to do that. You kind of can do it. They don't support it, but it would be nice. We also have, to protect confidentiality of users on the network, disable file and printer sharing, hide a shared folder. If you don't want the shared folder to start up when you go to / whatever the computer name is, put a $ at the end of the share name. That makes it a hidden share. When you look at the shares that are available on machines, we have C:, $, whatever the roots are. These I think I'll be able to see. Let's see if I can see them here. More stuff than you ever wanted on tonight, isn't it? We'll discard those things again. And administrative tools. Where's computer management? Minimize this. Computer management, make it nice and big here, and then I'll go to shared folders. The shares that are available, and I know I can't make the text any bigger, but if you go here, $C is a hidden share. Can't see it too close, but C:\Windows, these are hidden shares for administrative purposes, for management purposes. If I wanted to get to the root of it, I could go \\, computer name, \C$. And if I have the authority to see that, like administrator, then you can log in and see the root drive. Let's see if I can do one here. \. Aha. So this is the virtual machine, and we've got the base computers. I have all of these things that are listed on the D drive. And the letter that I went to was $D$. If I just went to D, it's only going to show me the shares that are there. If I just want to see the shares that are available, shares, that's a different machine, but shares that are on that computer. And that's when you right-click on it and share. And that's what's going to show up when you go across the network. Local shares, troubleshooting, cable tester, loopback. I think we kind of talked about those things. Wireless locators, TCP/IP utilities, cable testers. Talk about those in the network plus class. Whether the cable's good or not, what type of cable is it. We had, this is another, years ago when we made our first Cat5 cables, we couldn't figure out where this crossover business worked because when you did the connector, the color sequence didn't look right. So they made the cables based on the color sequence of the connector, which was wrong because if you actually take one apart, there's a crossover inside it. But it would connect to the server, but then when you tried to do anything, it wouldn't. Test these things, are they right? And you'll make wire or have made wire in the Network Plus class.
Yeah.
And you can test the wire, you haven't had it yet, but make wire and you test it, is it good? What's the sequence? The standards that we're going to use. A loopback plug is used to test the port basically. Works with live cables and ports and buying a loopback plug. Pay attention to the Ethernet speed it's supported. Some only do 100 megabits per second. You want something that's going to go to gigabit speed now. Wireless locators. There are some little, I used to have a little portable device that I could carry around that I don't have anymore. Looked like a USB key that would find wireless networks. And golly, it would find wireless networks that weren't broadcasting their SID, their SSID. That, well, if you turn it off, it still shows up. So you can turn it off if you want. It's kind of good for somebody driving into your driveway won't see it, but if somebody's really dedicated to finding it, they're going to find the SSID. TCP/IP utilities. I'm going to click through these because you can look at them, you can try them out, you're going to do them in networking, you're going to do them in Cisco. Ping. Is it there? Is it working? IP config is something that you really do need to look at all. Release, renew, display DNS, flush DNS. Display DNS shows you all the cached lookups. Flush DNS gets rid of everything that's cached. If something gets cached wrong, it's going to be wrong until this happens, until you flush it. It's flushed when you restart the system or when you use the IP config flush DNS. Otherwise, they're cached. If you go to a location and you get a bad resolution on it, that gets cached. So occasionally you do need to make these things go away by either restarting the system. actually shutting down the system and then restarting, it's a good thing to happen in Windows because it clears the whole thing. NS lookup is we'll use this really cool word, proxy for DNS. What it does is it's a test of DNS. DNS, domain name server, domain name system, what's the significance of it? Translates. That's what it does. Translates names to IP addresses, but what's the significance? Have you ever been anywhere? You ever shut down your DNS server?
No.
Oh, can't get on that.
You can't go anywhere unless you know all the IP addresses to where you want to go. Of course, you have all those memorized, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, Facebook's got like 4,000 or 5,000 IP addresses. You don't have at least one of them memorized?
I got 8.8.8.8.8.
That's a DNS server. 8.8.8.8 is a DNS server. Traceroute goes through. What it really does is ping. If we have routers, what it really does is in the packet we have this thing called a TTL, a time to live.
It shows you all the hops too.
Shows you all the hops, but how does it show you all the hops? All you Cisco grads, tell me what it does.
It tells you how long a packet's gonna live.
Well, traceroute, the first thing it does is make a TTL of 1. What is a TTL? When a TTL gets to 0, what happens?
It dies.
It dies. And what does the router do? It sends you an ICMP packet that says, it died.
It actually says that.
It died. So we get this back, we know this router's good, right? It's there, because we get the error message back from that IP address. And then we make a TTL of 2. And it goes here, and it goes to here, and what happens? It dies. And what happens?
No.
Sends us back a message.
It died.
It died. But we get a list of routers. When you stop getting the list of routers, guess what?
You found which one.
You found the problem. That's the problem. One of the things that makes traceroute slow is it does DNS lookups. You can turn off DNS resolution, and you'll have to look at the help file. I think it's D in Windows, but don't hold me to that one. It's different switches in Linux and Windows, but you can turn off, and it's really, really fast if you just get the IP addresses. If you do the DNS resolution, really takes some time. But that's what it says down here. Packets assigned a time to live, which is the number of hop counts that it can make before a router drops a packet and sends an ICM message back. It said it died. The net commands, net use is one. This is the one I talked about earlier. Net use is used for mapping drive letters at the command line or in a script. Because you guys get a map to a couple of different directories, right? You get the students' apps and you get your home directories. Guess how you get those? There's a script that uses the net use command that maps those for you in a policy. Net user manages user accounts, and you can create user accounts with it. NBT stat is a net BIOS. Net BIOS is an older protocol that theoretically you don't need anymore. Some applications still need net BIOS. Most don't. Net stat gives you the statistics. Netstat-A, and this is one that you probably want to run occasionally because it lists the statistics of all active connections. Netstat-A, what's connected to your machine? What are you connected to? Did somebody put something nasty on your machine that's now got you connected someplace that you have no clue where you're connected to? Run those things occasionally. Netstat-B lists the programs that are using the connection, which is kind of handy too, because that helps you isolate what's going on. And this is the 169.254. What does that mean? 169.254 means that we're trying to get a DHCP, our NIC set for DHCP, but we can't contact the DHCP server. And if John sits down, he's the only one that has our 169.254 and says that he can't get to an authentication server, with probably the issue. The network's down, right? Because he can't get on. That's what your users are going to tell you. Start troubleshooting that machine and that network path for that machine. And if everything else is working, probably a good chance it's somewhere at the really low levels. No, we're intermittent. Intermittent are really a lot of trouble. These are troubleshooting tips, and you guys can read those out of the book. I don't think there's anything new. IP config, release, and renew. Can you get an address? And that's what that really is talking about there. When you do IP config renew, it actually does a release and renew. It's a two-step process. It's kind of handy to do it both ways. Cable modem, make sure your TV works, and all sorts of things there.
This morning, Comcast had to resend a signal to my, not the route, what is it they use?
The cable modem.
Modem. They
Yeah.
had to resend a signal.
Yeah, they sometimes have issues, and I think that they have issues more often now that I'm at home at strange times of the day and working at things in the middle of the day. They actually have probably more issues than they would ever admit to us.
And then I remembered I can actually log on the account and do the same thing.
Yeah. If you have no internet connectivity, the internet's down, the network's down, see if you can ping an IP address, maybe that 8.8.8.8, which is easy to remember, that John was talking about. If you can ping an IP address, but you can't ping a name, DNS is probably going to be the answer to that. You may want to flush the DNS cache that's on your individual machine. Firewall connections, release the current. These are the step-by-steps that are in your book. So we're going to click through those. Net view command views the computer names. Try out the net. A whole bunch of there's a whole series of net commands: net view, net use, net user. Those sorts of things. Take a look at those. For a slow network, adapter settings. Look at the traffic that's on the network for one thing. Where are you trying to go? It's not necessarily going to be your network. We've talked about this before. Where's the choke point? How fast is your local network at home? Maybe 100 meg or 1,000 meg. And you go to a router, right? And you go to the internet. And what's your ISP speed? A good one may be, what, 30 meg? Do you ever actually really get that?
No.
Well, a good download is, if you can get to 3 meg, that's pretty good download speed, huh? That's really good.
Josh is getting like 5.
So what are your speeds? Well, the download speed, if he's getting like 5, a lot of that depends on the other end, too. It's not necessarily you. What's the other end? You've got to consider everything. You've got to check what's going on at each of the locations. In this building, we'd have to check the individual networks. And if all of them are slow, then we need to go look for something that's common. Priority in the open network and sharing center, change the network adapters. If you have 2 adapters, and this happened to me the other day when I had a wireless hooked up to this machine, It started out on the wireless and then went to the wired, but since it started on the wireless and it won't use both of them at the same time, it stayed on the wireless. So it's really, really, really slow. So why is it so slow? So I finally went to Task Manager, and they said, oh yeah, you're using the wireless. So I disabled the wireless and it picked the connectivity up on the wire and got substantially faster. A gigabit versus 150 meg, which really wasn't being 150 meg. So the book's got some procedures there. The page numbers may or may not be right. This chapter's in 700 and something, and the slides are from a book that are in the 300. So remote desktop, lots of different things that you can configure for network connectivity in this one. Sharing files is, to me, important to you, not necessarily important to testing. The important things to take away from this one is sharing files and how to use remote desktop. Because if you're the network administrator and you live in Blacksburg, and somebody needs their password reset, you want to drive to Roanoke for 45 minutes to do a minute and a half worth of work.
If your wife's pregnant and everything, you want to get away from her. What if she goes in labor? Oh, well, that's what happens.
Ping, IP config, trace route. Remember how trace route works. And then they got the net use, net user, MBT stat, net stat. Try out these commands, see what they actually do for you. These are the kinds of things, again, if you go to the objectives, these are some of the commands that you need to know about that are in those objectives. Questions? Ready for a break? Take a break.